Let's begin with some general tips for dealing with word problems. Now, word problems are oftentimes the most difficult thing for students to do, but it's also in some ways the most important thing any student of mathematics needs to be able to do. A word problem sets up a practical situation where someone might use mathematics to do something, and your task as the person that's trying to solve the word problem is to translate that problem into mathematics and to find a solution. All right. Now, these are not easy, and it's not something that comes right away. Word problems just come with a lot of practice. But I'm going to give you some general tips to help you work through the process in hopes that it will help you do the word problems that you run into. So the first thing you should always do is you should read the problem. You might want to even copy it, but at the very least, you should highlight important parts. So anytime you see a word problem, the first thing you should do is you should just read it through. You need to just read it through. In fact, it's probably best to copy the whole thing down, but at the very least, you need to highlight anything that looks important. So that means highlighting things that look mathematical in nature, highlighting things that involve variables or number quantities of some sort, and also highlighting goals. One of the main goals that you should be doing while you're reading this is finding the goal of the problem. Okay? That's sometimes fairly straightforward, and sometimes that's not obvious at all. It just depends on the nature of the problem. But generally speaking, there's something practical going on, like someone wants to maximize their profit, or they want to minimize the cost, or they want to figure out how many people will be in such and such a place at a certain time to estimate various things. So it's very, very important that you figure out what the goal of the problem is. The next thing that you should do is you should develop a picture in your mind. This doesn't need to be mathematical, and in fact, the later videos where we do problems, this are all based off problems that a farmer or a rancher might run into. And it's oftentimes good just to think about what it's like to be in that situation. Don't be in a rush to just find the math very quickly, but make sure that you try to sort of visualize or try to understand what you're trying to do. If you're trying to figure out what a farmer needs to do, imagine that you're a farmer that doesn't necessarily have the math ready to go. Go ahead, think about it like that, and then think about the nature of the problem in that way. Once you've pictured it, it's always good to build what I call a dictionary. The idea of a dictionary is that you translate from practical things about the problem to mathematical things about the problem. So if you have variables, it's good to label the variables with their meaning. It's also good to go ahead and sort of write down sort of key things that you need to know and understand. And once you've done those things, once you get everything translated into something mathematical, what you want to do is you just want to sort of brainstorm related mathematical concepts. What I mean by that is if you see a keyword like linear, then that means that you're probably going to need a line of some sort. If you're doing something like finding an area, that means you're going to have to multiply a length and a width to find an area. If you know it's an exponential or logarithmic model or a sine model, then that means that at some point you should write down something with an exponential, a logarithm, or a sine. Make sure that you write down all of those mathematical concepts, and make sure that you translate your goal into something that you should do mathematically. That is, you should remove it from its practical application and just think about it in the abstract mathematical way. And once you've done that, you're on your way to doing the math problem. So the word problem, oftentimes the difficult part is just understanding the concept, figuring out what you're supposed to find, trying to just get a picture in your head that's accurate, and then translating all that into mathematics, both by translating variables and by translating related concepts. Once you get to this point, you should just have a well-defined math problem independent of the practical application. So then the middle step and the last thing I'll write down is you math it. So if you have a couple equations and you know you need to solve for a specific variable, you solve for that variable. If you know that you need to maximize something, for example, there's ways to mathematically maximize a certain thing. And so once you've done all that math, you'll get some solution that's related to your goal. And if you translated your goal correctly using your dictionary into some sort of mathematical problem, by the time you finish that mathematical problem, it'll give you the goal right off the bat. So if you needed to figure out the goal was to find some A, and you translated that down to mathematics, and then you used math to find A, that's the solution to your problem. So these are just some general tips. I will tell you that you don't necessarily know the right math concept. So if you're not sure, it's always okay to write a little bit more than a little bit less. Make sure that you throw down anything that you think is useful. It's okay to write down parts of the problem that are ultimately not useful, because it might turn out that the first thing you think about isn't correct, but the fourth thing is. And so do your best to sort of throw out all the different ideas that you might need to in order to solve that problem.